In April 1989, a 28-year-old white female jogger was raped, beaten, and left for dead in Central Park. The NYPD quickly accused 5 teenagers who were in the park that night. 4 were black, 1 was Hispanic. Suspect Yusuf Salam was 15 at the time.
The narrative that they sold the public was completely false.
It was a case built on false confessions, but the story of interracial gang rape gripped a city whose crime rate has soared.
They wanted to solve this case so quickly that they felt like the story of the 5 sounded much, much better than there being one person.
Suspect Raymond Santana was 14. Help us understand why you confessed.
We were 14, 15, 16-year-olds who never been involved with the law, who never had a criminal record, who were very naive. And then you add in no food, no drink, no water, no sleep. And then you throw in the number one ingredient is pressure.
But their statements were inconsistent. There were no witnesses and no DNA evidence against the 5. The jogger had no memory of the attack. Still, 2 trial juries convicted them all. Salam, Santana, and 2 other juveniles served 7 years. A 5th defendant served 13.
There wasn't enough skepticism. People weren't asking the right questions.
Sarah Burns produced and directed a new film called The Central Park 5. She had help from her father, renowned documentarian Ken Burns, and her filmmaker husband, David McMahon.
This is about these 5 men who were children and who were completely dehumanized. They had no voice. They were treated as animals.
In 2002, after 13 years, an incarcerated serial rapist and murderer came forward with a true confession in the jogger attack, corroborated by DNA evidence. Courts agreed to throw out the convictions of the Central Park 5.
Our records have been wiped clean, but the indelible scar of going to prison is still there.
They were once registered sexual predators who couldn't get a job. Now 38, Salam and Santana both work for hospitals and are fathers.
I don't know, what will be in my future. Got to put one step forward and move on.
A lawsuit against the police and prosecutors behind their wrongful convictions is pending. But they say no amount of money could give them back the years they lost. Michelle Miller, CBS News, New York.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. The reason why the Central Park 5 is coming back into the light, there's a new documentary on Netflix called When We Were Us, or
can't remember the name.
I'll get you the proper name. That's terrible. See, I'm getting old. But the more recent one shows you the abuse that was given to Corey Wise, who spent the most time in there, and who Mateus Reyes had confronted in a TV room years prior to that. But he had met Corey Weiss up in the first fight happened at Attica.
No, it was in Rikers.
Was it Rikers?
They had Rikers,
They said
yeah.
Attica in the piece, which I saw recently.
They changed things around in the series.
They turned it around?
In other words, what do they call it, artistic license.
Okay.
So some things they changed around.
All right, well, anyway, they met again years later, and Mateus Reyes felt a little guilt, and he had gotten some religion, and he decided to help Weiss out because he showed no animosity towards him because of the previous fight. Mateus even apologized to Corey about that. And he said, well, keep the faith. So he wound up turning himself in and confessing that he was a single assaulter and that the DNA matched. But through all this, Trump and his shenanigans way back there in '89, this was much later than that. We're talking about 2000 something, when they finally got out, 2002, 3?
2 or 3.
2 or 3.
Forward.
All right. And even worse, when they got the settlement in 2014, Trump was adamant about them being guilty and that they didn't deserve this $41 million that they were receiving between the 5 of them. And Corey, of course, receiving the most of the, because he was the most abused. But this film shows you the abuse that happened to Corey. And I recommend it, everybody should see it, to show you the injustice in the criminal injustice system. All right? Well, give us your take on that. Did you see the recent one?
Yeah.
On Netflix? Mm-hmm. All right. Tell me what you thought about. See, I never realized that Corey went through all that stuff. And I see him every Saturday at National Action Network. And he's a great guy. He doesn't carry that animosity, which I would think anybody would have, having been through all that. But the psychological effects of that, I mean, I'm sure him watching this film, he goes right back into it.
There are, until you've been in an interrogation,
Ooh, what?
we go to school for interrogation.
Okay.
And it's a psychological drama
Right.
for the defendant. Now imagine a 15 or a 16-year-old kid,
14 in one case.
all right? They can't handle that kind of pressure. And I want to be very clear. We know there are people serving time for crimes they did not commit. Many of the people incarcerated or arrested in Brooklyn during the tenure of Joe Hines or Charles Hines were wrongfully accused. And that detective in Staten Island, where most of his cases have been proven to be bogus, they're going back. Ken Thompson started a unit, an integrity unit, when he was the DA in Brooklyn until his demise a few years ago. And I know the guys that work in that unit. And they were going back and reopening cases that Charles Hines had prosecuted. And at last count, there were, I think, 22 guys, 22, who have been released from prison because they were not the guys that had committed the crime. And that unit is an integral part of the Brooklyn, the Kings County District Attorney's Office. Very critical. We have many people in jail. I know one of the detectives that worked on the Central Park 5 case. I met him years later.
Which one is that?
Honeyman, Bob Honeyman. You don't see him in there.
Okay.
But he swears to this day that they did it. At least the last time I saw him, he swore that, well, they did it. There's no getting around it. And it's very obvious he didn't do it. A lot of these people have moved on with their lives, made a lot of money. Linda Fairstein has written books. She's traveled across the country.
She just quit a job.
She just resigned her job from one of the colleges here in New York, and she's on the board. They told her, you got to go. See, and this is the damage that's done to people in the name of justice. Mayor Koch jumped into the fray on this. No police officer or a detective should be responding to anything coming out of the mouth of the mayor or any politician. The job is to get to the truth of the matter and, if possible, make the arrest. Every case is not closed with an arrest. Many cases, thousands, are left unsolved. But Koch jumped in because it was a white woman that was raped. The term wolf pack and other terms were thrown up by even Hillary Clinton and other people.
Don't
the
forget
pressure,
Trump.
you know, but the thing is this, is that the detectives in that special victims unit were responding to the political aspect and not doing their job proficiently. It's not sufficient to get a closing on the case. It is critical to close the case with the person who is responsible for the crime. I've worked on cases where we proved that the defendant did not commit the crime and got them off.
Do you remember the detective that was on both cases, the Mateus Reyes case?
He has an Irish name, a guy on Fox News.
Yeah, what's his name?
I can't remember his name.
But we have to come up with his name. Somebody call in and give us a name on that.
But the thing
Because
is to
he
get
had
to
the
the bottom.
DNA of Mateus Reyes.
Yeah.
And he knew that the 5 weren't he was
There was
working
no
on
DNA
both.
that matched.
All right. They didn't have any matching DNA. Now, I'm supposed it crossed his mind that it possibly could have been Mateus Reyes. But he had the DNA, but he never bothered to check, cross-check. And he was working on both cases.
Right.
Now, how could that possibly happen?
Also, the psychological profile of rapists varies. Guys that rape outdoors generally don't rape indoors. Reyes almost got caught in a park rape and got away. And he switched from outdoor to indoor. He wound up killing a woman, raping her and killing her.
She was pregnant, too.
So that family suffered a double loss in the baby and the mother
Right.
when they were falsely accusing these guys of a crime that they didn't commit. See, it's not to get to the facts. I never wanted to know the facts of the case. I need to know the truth. Facts and truth are not the same thing.
This detective that was working on both cases, why isn't he reprimanded or called to task because he never tested the DNA match, which he should have automatically?
Well, supervisors, we're trained to do the job. Also, the supervisor, the detective sergeant for that unit, there's a lieutenant and a captain. In reviewing the cases and reading the DD5s, those are the reports, they should say, well, we have a pattern here. Did you cross-check that with this? And we will do cross-checks across counties
Right, right.
for crime patterns.
Right.
Because criminals just don't stay in one neighborhood, they'll go to another neighborhood. Things get too hot, they'll move to another area, not residentially, but they'll operate in another area and still commit their crimes. So we cross-check crime patterns from precinct to precinct, from county to county. And evidently that wasn't done because all the banter about, oh, these guys were caught, and keep in mind, it was a high-profile case.
Right. Okay.
And to know what happened to the detectives that worked on that case, did they get grade? Did they get promoted in grade as a result of, quote unquote, having solved that crime? Were they put in for a promotion? These are all the behind the scene things that need to be looked at. Even the guy that's the reporter now for Fox News.
Whose name we can't remember.
Right. But these cases where people are wrongfully arrested, have served time, and the case was not properly handled, the people involved should take the weight for what they did. I worked on a case, I stayed overtime working on a case, they had a felon for robbery. And the sergeant was insistent that this boy stand on a lineup. And I told the detective, I pulled the computer records of all the photos because our systems were computerized. If you said the guy had a scar on his left cheek, the computer would pick out everybody with a scar on the left cheek. So you weren't looking at 10,000 photographs. The victim and the 5 witnesses saw not only the boy that they had in custody, but a second guy who I thought was he himself, but it was a guy who looked like his twin brother. And neither of them had been picked out by the victim or the witnesses, and this sergeant was insistent on the detective putting this guy in a lineup, trying to nail him for a crime he didn't commit. It was a stabbing. So I gave her all the documents. I told her, don't do it. They were going to bring her up on insubordination.
But in this case, we didn't have a detective as good as you are. So how do we justify this man not, I mean, something happening to this detective? I mean, of course they signed the agreement, the $40 million agreement, claiming no,
It's a settlement.
a settlement. Okay.
No wrongdoing.
No wrongdoing on the part of the...
No admission of having done anything wrong.
All right, all right. So that's passed. Nothing we can do about that. All right. Well, here, I want to go back to a Roland, which I learned a lot about bitterness and not being angry about things that you can't change, or not taking on hate from being abused. And play item number 2. This is Yusef Salam talking about his experience in the Central Park Five.
Donald Trump then comes out. And Donald Trump, a common citizen, he takes his own money, pays for newspaper space in New York City's main newspapers, and he calls for the reinstatement of the death penalty specifically for the Central Park jogger case. There were other folks who were chiming in, and they were saying things like, you know, if we took the eldest one of them, Corey Wise, and we hung him from a tree in Central Park, and if we took the others and we horsewhipped them, maybe our park would be safe again. This is what, you know, like, this whole process that they put us through was so amazing that when I tell young people about it today, and my mentor, of course, is definitely Malcolm X. But when I say Nelson Mandela, because people always ask me, they say, well, you know, had I not known you was in prison, I would have never known. Like your demeanor, your presence, the way that you carry yourself. I've seen people who come home from prison, you don't even look like that. And I said, well, you know, Mandiba used to say, to be angry, to be bitter, is like drinking poison and expecting your enemies to die. They don't care what they do to you and how they do it. They're like, man, I mean, I'm sure Donald Trump is sleeping on his plush king-size, you know, custom-made beds with the pillowcases and all of that stuff that has 8,000 thread counts. I'm sure, you know, somebody wrote in one of the papers, they said when they found out that we were innocent, you would hope and wonder that we would have received some sort of apology. And they said this thing about apologizing was the dust for one of his maids to sweep up. The only apology, people always ask me, they say, have you ever received an apology? And the only apology that we have ever received, the only apology we have ever received was from one of the courtroom artists that used to draw us. You know, we went run over by a few different trains and we looking, we see some light, some trains and some cars that run us over. But we think that this is the justice coming. You know.
So with that, pack the jail, like the slave ships when they sail, but they don't know. My people was made to go. My people won't say today. My people got more people to do. More people, more sisters and brothers. My people stay strong and ours. My people will never fail. My people will always remain with a story to tell. My people was made to adore.
Well, that's, I always take that to heart, what he said about bitterness and hatred. I always thought that was a lesson for me, to see somebody go through all those pains, and we know Yusef very well. You see, he had one of his kids on his knee, so he came out sane, and you know, no bitterness. I mean, to go through that much injustice and come out sane and not mad at the world, you need a hell of a support system. That's why I think we all, as blacks, have to understand that that hate, you know, destroys the system, destroys the spirituality. So, like, we'll just have to pray for this nut we've got in the White House, because he's a total embarrassment. And you know, this is all from bitterness and hate. There's a classic example of bitterness and hate. This jealous man was jealous of Obama. We all know that. When at what was that? that luncheon press conference, or I forgot what it's called, where Obama embarrassed him, and from that point
At
on,
the press dinner.
Press
Yes.
dinner. It's called something else. Well, we're all getting old here. Nobody can. But you know, this bitterness that comes from our president is prevalent throughout all of his exposure. He goes over to London and embarrasses everybody, and I guess he's no longer an embarrassment to us.
May I say this, brother? And first of all, we thank the Most High for blessing us with the opportunity to have a dialogue around the Central Park jogger case. The point I want to make, that this at the top of my mind, is this part about bitterness and hate. The way black people have been conditioned in America is that if you even remember the harm, that the injustices that have been done to us, that's off limits. And the bitterness and hate that Brother Yusuf demonstrates in person, and when you see him on video, in any interview, is genuine. He had the support of his mom,
Right.
And he also had the support of his spiritual pursuit, which is Islam and the Quran. All right, so he had that. Now, going back to the detective, your question, you know, how could this guy be working on 2 cases and have evidence in one case that would corroborate the innocence of these Central Park brothers? I never heard, based on my readings, 100 Years of Lynching by Ginsberg, any book on lynching, I never heard of the lynchers apologizing. In that atmosphere of the Central Park, that was immediately a lynching environment. So here's a guy who's a detective. He sees that something is wrong, but he's not going to stop the momentum of that lynching train. He's not going to do it because there's, quote, there's too many people involved. And this is the way we give when you work around Caucasian people in corporate America, you find out that they are not so much in pursuit of truth. They will be in a meeting, and there's something that's incorrect on the table, but it's been put forth by someone who is in a higher authority. They won't correct it, not challenge it. They won't correct it. I'm sitting in a meeting, I'm looking at these, I said, this whole group knows that what the guy is saying is incorrect. He's been operating on incorrect information, and they're not saying anything. Brother Leroy did, but not to gain any kudos, all right? But you will see, they'll do anything, they call it CYA. They are the authors of it, they authenticate it, they stamp it, the good housekeeping of approval, cover your behind. That's what they do. The other thing is, and that's on the lynching environment, which Trump's ad was a part of. Or they had these Negroes, and Negroes always want to rape a white woman. So that whole mystique is in play in this case. The settlement, once again, no admission of having done anything wrong on the part of the authorities. That's standard as it relates to us as a people. They're not going to admit anything. They don't admit that the enslavement of black people in America was wrong. They don't admit that. And that's even bigger than the Central Park case. Alton Maddox, it was more than 5. 5 went to trial.
It was 6, yeah, right.
He has a number of 7, 8, in fact, but he'd have to explain that. In an interview that I did with him, okay, what happened is that they had some kind of pre-trial, I don't know what it's called. Yeah, and it was at that, he's representing Michael Briscoe at that point in time.
Okay.
And Alton says, if you forego your right to an immediate trial,
Right.
if you forego that, if you sign that off, which the legal aids will automatically do in the case you don't even know that you've been signed off, that you've foregone your right to an immediate trial. He said, so I said, well, why did you ask for an immediate trial with Michael Briscoe, one of the accused in this case? He said, because the longer you take to go to trial, the more they're going to build lies against you. He said, so you go to trial immediately. He said, I always do that. But Alton is a study in itself, and it is wrong for a lot of us. I'm not talking about you, Winston. I'm not. For a lot of us not to interview Alton. Alton is a school. People may not like what he says. I'm dealing.
Alton is always welcome here.
No. I'm not dealing. I said I'm not dealing with you. I said I'm talking about other Negroes in media. It's like interviewing Alton is like, damn. You got time. You got time. I'm not even going to that. People be jiving, man.
We had him on once.
Yeah, he's been on.
No,
He's not talking about us.
I know.
I'm not talking about us.
But I want him to come back.
I'm talking about Negroes who have time on radio, and all they do, radio, and even public access. They do yuck.
Yeah.
It ain't got nothing to do with moving black people to a higher level of understanding.
Okay.
But I just wanted to and that, the other thing, what we're talking about, the Netflix series is a demonstration of what happens when you have a free-minded black person who has the skills and the determination to put together a series that exposes the lies. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's what has us here at this table now. Today is Wednesday. Monday, they had a counterattack. I call it a counterattack on WABC. They had this Caucasian guy. I call him Bo Diddley. Bo Diddley. He's a Caucasian Bo Diddley. You understand? And Fairstein and somebody to refute what's going on. But the fact is, when the truth hits the scene, people's eyes begin to open up. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Wow, that's the way it happened? Because the media is part of the lynching environment.
Right.
Brother Wayne, I went down to, Brother Wayne would go to the trial. He would go to the trial along with, he was part of a group called Mother Love, which consisted of his wife, Ilombe Brath, Sister Numsa Brath, and others. And they dedicated themselves to covering the trial, as a community. So Brother Wayne, so I got there at lunchtime, and Brother Wayne said, man, he said, there's a black guy who's a reporter, and every time the prosecution makes a point, he writes. He said, but when the lawyers for the defense, this is the Central Park case, the actual case, he said when the lawyers for the defendants is making a case, he doesn't even write. So the guy, he said, there's a guy right now. We're standing in the where the elevators are in the court building, and he engaged the guy. Hey, how you doing? What media are you with? He was with one of the top publications in New York City. Now, you read that publication thinking that you're reading the truth, but the reporter himself has edited before it even got on paper. So you're dealing with people. Black people are not dealing with honest people in media, and that is why black media, this show, Community Cop, and Nat Wood's program and others, Sister Veronica's program. That's why these programs are not just good, but they're critical. They're critical.
And we've been on a long time.
Yeah.
By the grace of God.
But on that video, it shows a violation of the rights of the boys. because they're being interrogated without their parents present. Right there, any statement taken, recorded, is inadmissible.
Why wasn't that brought up during the trial?
The DA, I don't know what the defense, if the defense ever brought it up, but you're seeing it in the documentary. They can't say it didn't happen because that's what they did. It's on film. Right there is, you have grounds to throw the case out. Statements, confessions, the whole ball of wax. You cannot interview a child without the parent present. You have to give Miranda to parent and child. The first thing you have the right to remain silent. Shut your mouth.
Right. Okay.
I always would tell it a youth.
Yeah, answer me one question before you finish. Why, with all this attention, why wouldn't anybody, even in the audience, see that and say something about it?
First of all, the people sitting in the courtroom don't know that. They do not know the law.
How about another lawyer?
Lawyers are not going to say anything unless it's the defense attorney.
Well, you said mother.
The parents don't.
Somebody should have.
None of their parents of these boys had ever been in court with their sons. They don't know the protocols and they don't know the law. This is another thing we've got to get down to, studying the law. In Eric Garner, they did a hoopty with the people talking about police procedure. His murder had nothing to do with police procedure. It had to do with criminal law. It wasn't about whether or not you could use the chokehold. The law says it's a felony to choke somebody. And that was on the books long before Eric Garner was murdered. And they're telling people police policy, it's not about policy and procedure. People need to know the law. The law states, and I did a paper on this, to cut off the airway or the blood supply to any individual is a felony, whether you're a police officer or a civilian. And if you're a police officer doing it, you are not a police officer because you are now engaged in a criminal act. So you can't be a police officer and a criminal at the same time. And if there's a group of cops, as they were on top of him, and he says repeatedly, I cannot breathe, everybody should be arrested for acting in concert. If I walk up on the scene and you guys are killing a guy unjustifiably and I draw my weapon and I shoot you, I'm good.
Not in this
Because
day and
you
age.
cannot. There's a crime also for inflicting torture and showing a disregard for human life when a person is begging for their life. That's a crime too. All right? And deadly physical force can be used to prevent or terminate the death of another person in an unlawful manner. These are the things that people need to know. It's not about police procedure. It's the penal code of the state of New York, which supersedes any procedure or guidelines by the New York City Police Department or any police department in the state of New York.
Well,
It is not about
Good luck.
training them and all this. No, it was a murder that you saw on video. You cannot interrogate a child without his parents present.
all these rules were broken, and we see them being, the law being set aside for certain individuals, like what Trump is doing. I'm just so amazed that it's taking so much time to get this. We'll never get him out of office unless we vote him out.
The Democratic Party is a joke.
No, don't
They're
that.
They're a joke.
Please don't do that.
What do you mean don't do that? They're
No,
a joke.
hey, give them a break.
Give 'em a
I mean,
break.
they're trying to do it the right way. We've got this con
Oh,
man
you know,
in
do
there.
we think we should indict?
Wait a
We
minute.
shouldn't indict. You got the report. You see everything. Oh, don't you open your mouth and they gave you a subpoena, don't go in there and don't say nothing. That's obstruction right there.
Of course it is.
All right, so that's ground. Every time he says that,
But it's the
That's
fault
grounds for
of
impeachment.
who's in charge. The Republican Party's in charge.
they're not in charge of the House of Representatives, who
Well,
is
I'm
responsible
saying,
for
well,
bringing
we
the
know
case.
he's tried in the Senate, And they have the majority of the Senate, so he cannot be impeached or removed from office.
And you know why the Democrats
But
are
where
doing
they're
nothing?
going to catch him, let me finish this. Where they're going to catch him is here in New York. You see,
We know about
You
that.
see somebody who's going to Rikers Island.
we know about that. But the fact is that the Democrats are not doing their job.
They are doing their
no,
job.
Let me finish my statement. They're more concerned with freaking politics than they are concerned
That's
with the
some of them.
welfare of the country.
That's some
The
of them.
Constitution states, not the Democratic or Republican Party, they're not concerned with the nation itself as a whole. This man has committed acts which call for impeachment. Don't worry about what the Republican Party approves or doesn't approve. You need to show the general public that you're about preserving the nation.
Exactly.
All right? And they're not doing that. They need to get up off their haunches and move forward with the impeachment. If the Republicans are going to block it, then let the Republicans stand on that. In 2020, you deal with 2020.
Well, that's
Don't
what's
worry
gonna
about,
happen.
oh, I might not get elected. That's not what you're there for. You're not there to be elected. You're there to take care of the nation and support the Constitution of the United States. It is not about being reelected. And that's the problem the Democrats are facing. They don't have the balls to do what they should do.
They're doing
If the
it.
Republicans want to stand in contrast to them, let them stand in contrast, and then let the people vote in 2020.
That's what's going to happen. Exactly.
Worried about don't
Well, that's
impeach
some
him.
of them. All of them aren't like that. Nancy Pelosi is just playing her game.
They're playing games. They're not doing what they
Well,
get paid to
well,
do.
they're
That's the
doing-
problem.
They're playing it the way it's dealt to them. You know, this clown in the White House he knows how to con. He's a New York con man, and
He's not conning me.
well, we're New Yorkers. We know the game, and that's what's sad about it. You know. But I want to show you something I saw in Community Cops yesterday, which is very, very close to me about being extraterrestrial. We had his name is Rockman.
Rahman.
Play that piece number 3. This is about the Dogons.
Rothman is a long way from
Professor Rockman. All right? Did you hear me? Roll number 3. Full screen, man. Why you-
Caller, welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from? Next caller, you on the air.
Salam alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Brother Rockman,
Yes, sir.
answer the brother question, because a lot of these people, they come with the perception that they are white, and they come from countries that's not even really Europe. Like when he said about Kardashians, they Romanians.
Yeah,
Give him the understanding about the Romanians.
Well,
Salam alaikum.
well, but the father is Scottish Dutch. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, what you have to understand is you have to understand whiteness. Even in this country, you know, when you came to America, even the Italians were not considered white in this country.
Right.
You know, even the Irish.
Right.
There is a Irish scholar by James Neaptive. He's actually at Harvard, but he wrote a book, How the Irish Became White. You see, when
Right.
Europeans come to America, they are allowed to become white, even if they come from Southern Europe. You understand? Albanians, some Albanians who are Muslims and some are very dark, they are called the ends of Europe, but some of them come and they fit into the whole concept of whiteness,
Right.
you know. But for us, I think what we have to focus right now is on ourselves. You have to remember, in this country, you have to look at what's going on. They have new immigrants in this country, and those immigrants, they don't care anything about us, okay? And you have to understand, those those immigrants are basically trying to get the economics of this country, the education of this country, and blacks are on the bottom, and we're going to stay that way because we're in the wrong paradigm right now. We have to change our paradigm. We have to create culture. We have to create productive culture, meaning the social structures of proper education, economics, politics, and law. And then we have to have something that we've never used before. It's called cosmogony. Cosmogony is how you view and understand yourself, how you perceive others, and how you find your place in the universe. And then you have to realize that culture is driven by two factors. First, survival and creativity. And you must have energy, you must have productivity, and you must have spirituality. That's what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was teaching us. Once we can undergo self-acceptance, all these other things will dissipate. Because once we can get to spiritual civilization, we can have peace. It's an equation. Peace equals freedom, justice, freedom plus justice plus equality. And that's what we've never had in this country.
Next call.
I need you to play the other part. What happened? I had called in and asked something about the Dogon, so that was the latter part of the piece there. And he was saying how the... You don't have that piece?
You said that we have to teach the youth.
Yeah, we have to teach the youth.
And that they have to get that message as to who they are.
Yeah, they have to get the message. Yes.
With respect to whether it's Sheikh Anta Diop or, as you say today, also the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Yes.
Would that be germane today in 2019
absolutely.
to young people
absolutely.
who are walking around,
yes.
whether with their pants sagging,
yes.
calling each other the N-word,
yes.
calling out to referring to our women as
yes.
with the B word?
Well, Michael, we have to be practical. And, you know, sadly, everybody is not going to make it. You realize that? Everybody is not going to make it. You know, it was said in the scriptures there was only 144,000 seen on Mount Zion. You understand? So, right now, my concern, I'm not concerned with the masses. I mean, I'm concerned with the masses, but I mean, I'm saying it's not the quantity right now. You know, we have to get those who think like similar to the way we think. How much are we give to give and get nothing in return? You understand?
Yes.
This teaching has been around for a long time. A lot of our people have been psychologically engineered so bad to break those bonds, to turn them around for righteousness, is going to be very difficult.
Is that why Elijah Muhammad said, go first after the believers?
Well, he said go first after the ones who were deeper in the mud.
That's what he said?
Yeah, go for yeah.
But did he say also, go after the believers instead of wasting a lot of time with people that you got to convince?
Well, here's what he said on that. He said, if you are just a believer, all you can do is believe. He needed people who could help him in his mission. You understand what I'm saying? See, to believe one thing and to know something, that's two different things. You
Let's
understand?
see if we can get one more call in.
Okay.
Welcome to Community Cop. Where you calling from?
Manhattan.
Go.
I'm curious about the Dogon. In the beginning of creation, supposed to have a religion that teaches us that the beginnings of creation come from the serious mystery.
Yes.
Would you give me a comment on that?
Yeah, that's very true. They say that they actually come from that star. You know, many people believe that the Dogon actually were in Kemet, and they came out of Kemet and they went in to Mali. And that's what I was saying. I had a friend who I met who was from Mali. He was the first one who told me that in this country, his ancestors believed that they could fly. What he was saying, that they could engage in space travel. So there's much more to know about the Dogon, but I think what we must understand is that to answer that question, you have to look at it in the context of this. We were taken away from culture and civilization. We were brought here and put on these plantations to serve white people and procure wealth for them. You understand? Now that work has been done, that time is up right now, and so to get back to where he's talking about, to the Dogon culture, or to get back to Kemet, that's where we got to undergo. We have to go spiritual sublimation.
Okay, again, let me just say again, tomorrow night there will be a meeting of the Professor Mackey study lecture series and study group, and that'll be at 103 Quincy Street in Brooklyn. Sister Keisha's going to lay it down about what we need to do moving ahead, what we need to
Now you must realize that was yesterday, so that meeting is tonight. So all of you that want to hear from Sister Mackey, I just wanted to give Community Cop a plug because they're exposing the knowledge that we need to know. And I was so happy to hear him talk about extraterrestrials, that we as humans are extraterrestrials. All right?
Go ahead.
In African religion and philosophy, in that study, there is a tapping into the knowledge of what we have, what black people have but don't know we have. As Brother Rahman points out, we were brought here to be enslaved, period, and not to have any memory of our culture, of our religion, of our God, of our abilities. So there are certain capacities that we have, and upon study, some of those abilities come back to the individual if you pursue them and you have the right intent. There are some of our children who are born able, and I'm not talking about travel, but they can see something that's happening in another part of the country or another part of the city, unbeknownst to the parent. And and being able to foretell things. I ran into a lady last week, and she was saying how I had a paper in my hand that said 2020. She said, you know, when I was a little girl, I saw 2020. I saw 2020, meaning she had this vision of 2020. Now I'm carrying a paper that has 2020 on it, and she related to it. And I said, well, she said, yeah, I could see. I said, what about, you have any children or grandchildren who have that same? She said, yeah, my grandson. She went on to talk about her grandson, how her grandson woke his mother up, her daughter, and told the daughter, look, if Mikey, the brother, the older brother, if Mikey does something, don't argue with him, because I want to see my mother alive on Mother's Day. She said, the boy woke her up in the middle of the night. So she told the lady that's telling me that. I'm standing there listening. She said, sure enough, Mikey did do something. He did something that affected the finances of the home that the mother would have argued about, but she didn't. And the boy had seen this days in advance, not knowing what the brother was planning to do. What I'm going at is this. Our abilities, these little abilities, some of the religions that we have learned in the captivity of America brand those abilities as demonic. They can only come from the devil. If your child can see something that is not visible, it can only come from and they suppress this. They suppress the child's capacity, and what happens is that in African religion and philosophy, I'll just say this in conclusion, when your children have these kind of gifts, it's for the family. It's not for the individual. It's for the family, so you encourage it. So traveling extraterrestrial is possible when you pursue the study of what you have. The Caucasians are doing this with remote viewing. That's being studied in Russia, here in America, remote viewing, where they can focus and, quote, so-called see something that's going on in Russia, etc.
Time travel?
No, it's not so much time travel. I only pick up bits and pieces of it. It really relates to their trying.
Didn't Tesla prove that you could time travel?
Well, I'm not saying, I can't say it's time travel. If you can see something that's going on in another part of the world, that's seeing in real time, not seeing back. Okay, seeing it in real time, foretelling things. You know, there are people out there that say they can do this, but they have an art at conning people. So I'm not putting this information out there for people to fall victim to someone who's a con artist and not real. But I think, Brother Graham, You told us about that exorcism on that train.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's entirely different.
But it's a power that is there that
the
we
everyday
don't know we
person
have.
can't just do that.
The power of the mind.
It's not the power of the mind either. That's all
What is
spirit. It's not about your mind. It's not about how you think. It's
Mind
all
is
spiritual,
spirit.
and it has to deal with spiritual authority.
Everything is mental.
Everything. Now, like when I was a
It's
child,
valiant.
I used to dream dreams.
Isn't that
And
mental?
there were days when I went to school and I told the kids what was going to happen that day. And they were, how do you know that? I dreamt it. And I told them in one particular day, because we were in the orchestral class, I said, Mrs. Lopez is going to say, well, you guys are going to tune your own instruments now. You've been playing it long enough, and Anthony will play the notes on the piano. And we got down in the auditorium, and that's exactly what she said. And they all looked at me. Then they went to the teacher. Did you tell Graham? She said, no, I just decided to do that when we walked in here. What are you talking about? They said, well, Graham told us everything you were going to say before we walked in here. I used to dream different things, and I would go to my grandmother, and my grandmother could interpret the dream. I had a dream of a plane flying, and it exploded, and I was standing in the front yard. I was a teenager at this point, and all the pieces of the plane falling down towards me, but I didn't run, and they fell in the front yard. And I woke up, and I called my grandmother. I went downstairs. She was in the kitchen, and I told her the dream. She said, somebody just passed. Because I saw the explosion, she said that was the spirit leaving the body. The explosion was the moment of death. It was somebody in the family that died because all the pieces fell into the front yard. Ring! The phone rings in the kitchen. It's my Aunt Edith. May? Edith. Yeah, who died? She said, how do you know somebody died? She said, Graham just had the vision. My cousin had just died. 2 minutes. The interpretation of dreams is one thing. Deuteronomy chapter 28 is a chapter on blessings and curses. And God said, if you honor me and worship me, I'll do this, boom, 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 I'll give you these blessings. But the next 80 verses about the curses. And in there he said to the children of Israel, not Jews, the children of Israel, he said, if you will not worship me as your God, I will bring various diseases upon you. He says, I will bring an adversary from the north with a fierce countenance that you know not of, and he will take your children away from you in ships and carry them to a land that you don't know of. He says, and in that land your children will plant the crops, but the harvest will not be theirs. In that land your sons will take wives, and another man will sleep with her. It says, in that land your children will curse you to your face. Your wife will curse you. He said, no one will take up the cause to protect or defend you no matter where you go in the earth until you return and worship me. And that's long before the transatlantic slave trade. But there's only one group of people on the earth that has happened.
Yes, sir.
And that's in Deuteronomy chapter 28.
Oh, like you fall away from your spirituality, which is I think is the basis of the humanity itself, your spirituality. The spirit moves on after you die, after this body
Spirit is you.
died. Spirit is God, or eternal energy. We're all a piece of God.
There are different
right?
kinds of spirits.
Oh, of course there are different kinds of spirits, just like there are different kinds of people. But my main concern is how we get along with each other. That's what I think we need to really focus on. Like Rockman said, that you have to teach your kids that they have a spirit, that it's not all materialism. It's not all the kind of sneakers you have on, or how you appear to be. You have to seek inside and find out the human part of you, the love energy, which I call God. So, like I say every week, the God in me loves the God in you. And that goes by the wayside to most people I speak it to, I'm sure.
But it's better that you say it than not.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's not being said, it's not absorbed. Something will happen in somebody's life that will reinforce what you're saying.
Okay.
The prompt.
He said, Rahman was talking about how our minds have been engineered, and they constantly reinforce it It's not that it was just, the blueprint was laid in 1555 to 1619, it's that it's continually reinforced. And we have to, we have to work.
You know who I'm speaking to? The people out there that don't believe in God.
Well,
See, I mean, those people are the really people we need to reach.
the people who don't believe in God, when something goes real bad in their life or they hurt,
that's when it comes out.
You know, whatever, this thing about not believing in God, I'm talking about black people, that's not us. What I'm saying, that's coming from that paradigm, that mindset that Rahman was talking about, the perversion that we're beginning to see in our communities. That's not us.
That's right.
But we have embraced it, and it's being fed to our children by way of these phones. They're watching porn. You don't know that they're watching porn. The lyrics of these songs, when we get into it, you say, wow, this is deep. But it's also, here you have grown men raping babies. I'm talking about black men beginning to do that. I'm looking at, I said, what? That's
black men doing it?
Also.
Oh, that's a sick mind. It's mental.
We have to, I'm just saying this in backing you up, we have to work real hard. We can't assume that anybody in our family is immune from what is happening in the general society.
Right.
At all.
You have to. We have to pay attention to voting, and in particular, you have to pay this census coming up in 2020. Don't hide from it. don't run and hide, or they're going to get me and all. Listen, you're looking out for you and your future when you identify who you are and stand up tall. Don't be ashamed of who you are.
And funding is done through
funding.
the
This is how
census.
we get money. This is how the system works. We can't pack up and go someplace else. We are stuck here, and we worked and built this country. So we should be demanding our rights. And you keep and continually do it the right way. Just because bad is prevailing so far in the White House, it'll come around. The Democrats will, I think even the Republicans will come to their senses. This man is such a buffoon, I think he's embarrassing the world. I mean, how could you go to London and talk about, oh, I didn't see the protest? I mean, this is a clown act. I mean, he's good. I mean, the replays, he can live off of.
We can't let Trump take our energy. It's
gotta laugh at it.
to note him, but we can't let him.
Power to the people for you in Manhattan here. The God in me loves the God in you. We got another minute for the Bronx.
Listen, Rahman, you was pointing out, referred to the mothership and the UFOs and whatnot. And Minister Farrakhan has done a series of presentations.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up to you.
Well, it's part 52 of The Time and What Must Be Done. It's called The Wheel.
Okay.
Part 52 of The Time and What Must Be Done. You go on to YouTube, you look for Time and What Must Be Done, part 52.
Okay.
And he covers that.
He actually experienced a UFO, I understand, in Mexico.
He experienced, quote,
I've got a clip
what we call a vision.
Okay. Power to the people. Again, the God in me, love the God in you. And for those of you who don't believe in God, I'll pray for you. Power to the people. God bless. Amen.
Oh, man. Alton Maddox. And that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah, supposedly he saw a spaceship in Mexico, right?
Yeah, they were